Welcome to Sleepy Tales, a place where myths, legends, and ancient stories are told slowly and softly to help you drift into a peaceful sleep. Before we begin, I'd love for you to share where you're from and what time it is where you are. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel, and if you enjoy relaxing stories, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a night of our peaceful tales. Now, settle in, relax, and allow tonight's bedtime story carry you into sleep.
Athena, famously born from Zeus's skull, fully armed and already tired, built her legend not on steamy affairs or heroic brawls, but on the thankless grind of keeping mortals slightly less disastrous. Between dodging unsolicited matchmaking and turning Medusa into a monster, her story is one of calculated vengeance, divine strategy, and the relentless pursuit of order in a world bent on chaos. The trouble with divine parenthood is that it rarely makes sense even to the gods themselves. Take Zeus, for instance, a serial romantic whose idea of family planning involved shape-shifting into livestock and then acting surprised when the offspring showed up wielding thunderbolts, tridents, or worse, requests for an allowance. Yet of all his paternity misadventures, none was quite so spectacularly absurd as the birth of Athena, the fully armoured embodiment of wisdom, strategic warfare, and, in retrospect, corporate efficiency. It all started, as these things often do, with a prophecy. The problem with prophecies on Olympus was that they multiplied like unpaid invoices. An ominous line from Gaia here, a cryptic rhyme from an oracle there, and soon enough, the gods had a backlog of forewarnings so thick even Hermes couldn't speed deliver them. In this particular case, the memo foretold that Métis, titaness of wisdom, strategy, and most ironically caution, would bear Zeus a child more powerful than he. Zeus, whose management style can best be described as act first, do the thinking never, immediately solved the problem by swallowing Métis whole. It was a bold move that spared him the embarrassment of raising a usurper, but introduced an entirely new form of indigestion. For months, divine gestation, like divine bureaucracy, knows no clear timeline. Zeus carried the unborn goddess around in his cranial cavity. The headaches that followed were monumental, even by Olympian standards. Mount Olympus itself shuddered under his groans, and lesser deities made a brisk business selling thunderstorm insurance to mortals. What no one realised was that these migraines were less a medical problem and more a structural one. A full-grown goddess of war and wisdom was trying to file her exit paperwork from inside his skull. When the pressure finally reached a point that even Zeus could no longer ignore, roughly coinciding with a board meeting he couldn't cancel, he ordered Hephaestus, Olympus's unofficial IT department, to do something about it. And so, in what remains history's only medically approved cranial splitting, Hephaestus cracked open Zeus's forehead. Out leapt Athena, fully grown, fully armoured, and in possession of an expression that suggested she'd already had enough of everyone's nonsense. Mortals like to romanticize this moment as a grand symbol of wisdom's birth. In truth, it was closer to an unplanned product launch. The Olympian pantheon, ever alert to new power shifts, braced for disaster. But Athena, unlike her half-siblings, didn't immediately start demanding shrines or staging divine tantrums. Instead, she adjusted her helmet, nodded curtly at the family, and got straight to work, thus earning her reputation as the patroness of those who actually get things done. Of course, being born from Zeus's skull did come with certain drawbacks. For one, Athena never quite grasped the point of mother-daughter brunches, given her mother now existed only as a disembodied voice of strategy rattling around somewhere in Zeus's grey matter. Family gatherings were complicated further by Hera's eternal suspicion that every new child was yet another of Zeus's romantic side quests. Athena, to her credit, quickly demonstrated a professionalism so relentless even Hera had to admit she was different, though she still kept a careful eye on who received the better temple budgets. Then there was the question of what exactly Athena stood for. Olympian job descriptions were rarely clear, but Athena's was vague even by immortal standards. Wisdom sounds impressive until you realise it covers everything from city planning to deciding which spear length best discourages a drunken satyr. Strategic warfare offered more prestige, but risked overlapping with Ares, whose approach to war involved less strategy and more stab everything repeatedly. And then there were crafts, weaving, pottery, and architectural design, proving once again that divine portfolios, like mortal resumes, tend to list every minor skill just to look well-rounded. This dizzying array of responsibilities made Athena the patron goddess of multitasking. While other deities focused on single branding campaigns, love, the sea, harvest, Athena juggled city walls, loom patterns, and battlefield tactics, often on the same afternoon. Mortals, ever eager to organise divine chaos into something understandable, eventually settled on calling her the goddess of civilization itself. This was accurate in the same way calling the sea damp is accurate. True, but missing most of the complexities. Naturally, the other gods viewed her with suspicion. After all, Athena's mere existence was proof that raw intelligence, rather than brute force or seduction, could claim a prime seat at Olympus's overcrowded table. Even Poseidon, whose main hobby was flooding inconvenient coastal towns, felt compelled to challenge her occasionally, most notably in the contest for patronage of a new city. Athena's gift of the olive tree, a symbol of peace, commerce, and the vague promise of gourmet appetizers, won the citizens over, defeating Poseidon's alternative proposal, an enormous saltwater spring nobody had asked for. It is worth noting, dryly, that divine contests were never really about the mortals who supposedly benefited from them. They were marketing battles, a clash of cosmic egos where the gods treated entire cities as test markets. That Athens still bears Athena's name stands as a testament to the unexpected consumer appeal of olives over briny fountains. The citizens rejoiced, the olive trade flourished, and Poseidon grumbled into his trident for a century or two. Despite these occasional spats, Athena's birth had one unintended upside for Olympus. She introduced a rare sense of order. While Zeus continued pursuing questionable romantic escapades, and Dionysus hosted wine-fueled seminars on why hangovers build character, Athena quietly built temples, codified laws, and inspired mortals to create something approximating civilization. Her mere presence suggested that intellect and planning might occasionally outperform divine impulse. Yet for all this, Athena was not humorless. She simply preferred a drier wit, the kind that could reduce a boasting hero to silence, or make an entire assembly question their life choices with a single raised eyebrow. She understood irony better than most immortals, possibly because her own existence was so saturated with it. Born from the skull of the god most famous for poor impulse control, she became the champion of measured thought. Created to avoid a prophecy, she ended up fulfilling the prophecy's spirit anyway by wielding enormous influence, just not through rebellion, but through relentless competence. One might think this combination of wisdom and power would breed arrogance, but Athena's pride took a quieter form. She saw mortals not merely as playthings or worshippers, but as stubborn pupils to be educated, sometimes by force if necessary. Their triumphs pleased her, but their repeated mistakes, especially when they ignored perfectly sound divine advice, tested her patience. It's hard to watch your chosen people build a shining democracy and then vote for the city's ruin because a silver-tongued demagogue promised free amphorae. Still, for all the frustrations, Athena remained committed. Unlike other gods, she didn't vanish in sulks when mortals disappointed her. Instead, she returned to the loom, drafted another battle plan, or whispered fresh ideas into a poet's restless dreams. In her eyes, civilization was never finished, only constantly revised. A stone wall under repair, a scroll with endless footnotes. And so, from the moment she stepped out of Zeus's forehead, helmet gleaming, shield ready, Athena began her career as Olympus's quiet fixer, the divine project manager no one had asked for, but everyone begrudgingly needed. Her siblings kept the wine flowing, the love affairs tangled, and the wars dramatic. Athena kept the walls standing, the laws coherent, and the mortals occasionally thinking before acting. In the next part, we shall observe how this tireless dedication played out, from bickering with Ares to assembling temples and tax codes, and why even a goddess of wisdom couldn't quite stop civilization from tripping over its own marble doorstep. After all, even the best strategic plan rarely survives first contact with human nature, and Olympus, as always, remained an ongoing case study in exactly that. If there is one universal truth on Olympus, it's that nothing stays simple for long, not even wisdom. From the moment Athena sprang, fully formed and fully armoured, from Zeus's cranium, the concept of wisdom became a dangerously flexible brand, endlessly stretched, redefined, and subjected to the same committee-driven chaos that eventually ruins all good ideas. At first, mortals assumed Athena's patronage would be strictly philosophical: scrolls, sober debate, and the occasional lecture about civic duty. But the gods, like mortal corporations, understood branding better than anyone. And so, Athena's portfolio quietly ballooned to cover crafts, strategic warfare, city planning, shipbuilding, and an alarmingly specific list of household projects. By the time the dust settled, she was somehow responsible for everything from olive oil quality standards to battlefield logistics, effectively making her Olympus's chief operations officer, minus the corner office. The problem with such a sprawling portfolio was the paperwork. Even a goddess can't oversee city walls, pottery kilns, and defensive alliances without generating mountains of administrative scrolls. The mortals, eager to please their patroness, dutifully produced records, plans, and tax codes by the amphora load, all stamped approved by Athena, in the fervent hope that she might actually read them. She did, of course, albeit with the resigned air of someone who knows she'll have to rewrite them anyway. Meanwhile, Olympus itself offered all the professional support of an unhelpful HR department. Zeus, for instance, preferred to measure divine success by the number of gold statues erected in his honour, which did little for Athena's urban development projects. Hera managed domestic affairs, by which she mostly meant plotting revenge on Zeus, and Dionysus, when sober enough, occasionally lent a sympathetic ear, before forgetting the entire conversation. Only Hephaestus proved truly useful, forging weapons, shields, and, in moments of surprising generosity, budget-friendly temple fittings. Yet Athena's real challenge wasn't the scroll towers threatening to topple in her temple offices. It was her half-brother Ares. Officially, both were gods of war, but their philosophies differed so profoundly they might as well have been employed by rival consulting firms. Athena championed strategy, formation discipline, and the delicate art of winning wars without destroying everything worth having. Ares, by contrast, saw combat as an elaborate excuse for creative homicide, measured exclusively in enemy skulls and personal glory. Mortals, in their usual fashion, were torn between these approaches. The wiser generals prayed to Athena for guidance before campaigns, built walls, trained troops, and crafted diplomatic treaties. The more excitable types found Ares' simpler message, stab until victorious, more immediately appealing. In countless conflicts, the two divine siblings found their influence clashing indirectly on mortal battlefields. A cosmic argument fought with hoplites instead of words. Of course, Olympus, like any family business, refused to acknowledge this internal competition outright. Publicly, Athena and Ares were expected to play nice, attend the same divine banquets, and offer blandly supportive statements about valuing diverse approaches to conflict. Privately, Athena kept a mental ledger of every city sacked under Ares' dubious patronage, and Ares likely decorated his personal quarters with casualty figures that annoyed her the most. Athena's frustration lay not in Ares himself. She had long accepted his existence as one of Olympus's regrettable fixed assets, but in mortal inconsistency. Cities that pledged devotion to her carefully crafted defensive plans would, in moments of panic or hubris, suddenly pivot to Ares, deciding that brute force was faster than building another layer of city walls. Predictably, these cities often regretted it, usually while on fire. But the cycle repeated with the regularity of poorly timed sacrifices. Faced with this perpetual brand confusion, Athena turned to what any self-respecting divine strategist would: rebranding. After all, if wisdom alone failed to inspire consistent loyalty, perhaps broadening the definition would, and so her temples doubled as craft workshops, art schools, and lecture halls. Pottery, weaving, and architecture became holy pursuits, not because Athena personally needed another amphora, but because tying civic identity to craftsmanship made cities harder to conquer and easier to unify. It was a subtle but effective pivot. Worship not just the goddess of victory, but the goddess of everything that makes victory worth having. Naturally, the paperwork nightmares intensified. Artisans petitioned for divine endorsement of new vase designs, city magistrates requested official blessings on ambitious drainage systems, and philosophers produced endless scrolls speculating what Athena really meant by wisdom. The goddess, whose patience was famously long but not infinite, quietly delegated some of this to priestesses who, through long exposure, mastered the delicate art of divine correspondence, replying in formal yet unhelpful language that said everything and nothing at once. Still, for all the bureaucratic headaches, Athena's strategy worked astonishingly well. Cities under her patronage tended to be richer, better defended, and, crucially, more interesting to live in. When travellers spoke of cultural marvels, advanced laws, and libraries of scrolls, they spoke of Athena's cities. Her greatest public relations victory was, of course, Athens itself, an urban experiment that, for a shining moment, balanced democracy, philosophy, and military power so skillfully that even Zeus looked impressed. This success inevitably bred resentment among her divine peers, though few dared voice it openly. Apollo, god of prophecy and music, sometimes claimed partial credit whenever an Athenian poet produced something quotable. Poseidon sulked for centuries over losing the city's patronage contest, occasionally reminding mortals of his displeasure with earthquakes or ill-timed floods. Even Hera, who nominally supported order, found Athena's popularity irritating, suspecting it was fueled less by divine virtue and more by well-timed olive harvests. Through it all, Athena maintained an air of dry professionalism. Unlike Dionysus, she didn't host ecstatic festivals, and unlike Aphrodite, she didn't inspire scandalous statuary. Her worship was marked by ceremonies that mixed solemnity with practicality, weaving competitions, processions showing off newly minted armour, and debates that occasionally degenerated into elaborate insults, but always under the guise of civic improvement. If the other gods found this dull, the mortals, at least, appreciated the tangible benefits. A city dedicated to Athena didn't merely receive divine favour in battle, it gained roads, trade agreements, and, importantly, a sense of purpose beyond conquest. Under her quiet guidance, mortals learned that power wielded without thought was rarely worth having, a lesson some learned only after disastrous alliances or ambitious yet catastrophically ill-planned campaigns. Yet despite her achievements, Athena remained oddly uncelebrated by poets compared to her flashier peers. Apollo's musical contests and Aphrodite's romantic intrigues made for livelier verses. Athena's triumphs, like designing a better water distribution system or drafting a legal code, lacked the immediate drama of seduction or divine revenge. The goddess herself seemed unbothered, as though perfectly aware that poets, like soldiers, were rarely inclined to immortalize the quiet brilliance that keeps civilization from falling apart between wars. Her relationship with mortals was equally pragmatic. Athena offered guidance, but expected effort in return. Lazy prayers, especially those asking for victory without preparation, were met with silence or, occasionally, polite divine contempt. Those who genuinely dedicated themselves to study, craft, or strategy often found inspiration at the most critical moment. A sudden idea for a defensive maneuver, a pattern that turned ordinary cloth into art, or a speech that swayed an assembly teetering on the brink of folly. Behind this carefully balanced patronage lay Athena's core belief that wisdom wasn't a static gift, but an ongoing discipline, as exhausting and necessary as maintaining city walls. Civilization itself, in her view, was a daily effort, a constant negotiation of laws, resources, and human nature's stubborn refusal to stay reasonable for more than an afternoon. And so, day after divine day, Athena reviewed plans, answered prayers, and oversaw the endless projects that kept mortals from devolving into chaos, all while dealing with the occasional catastrophic decision made in her name by well-meaning but misguided devotees. After all, even the best PR team can't prevent every misunderstanding when mortals are involved. In the next part, we'll turn to an area where Athena's brand famously faltered: love, or rather the conspicuous absence thereof, and why her refusal to participate in Olympus's most popular pastime baffled gods, mortals, and gossip columnists alike. Because even a goddess who perfected strategy couldn't quite stop poets from asking the same embarrassing question for eternity: but why won't she date anyone? It is a truth universally ignored on Olympus that the gods, for all their cosmic power, were strangely obsessed with each other's romantic business. Affairs, flings, betrayals, these were the currency of divine gossip, traded over ambrosia the way mortals might swap market rumours. And yet, amid this endless swirl of seduction and scandal, there stood Athena, immovable, imperturbable, and to the exasperation of poets everywhere, completely uninterested. Her commitment to chastity, publicly framed as a dignified devotion to duty, created an irresistible mystery. Poets, sculptors, and speculative philosophers alike found the concept both baffling and tantalizing. After all, what was the point of divine beauty, keen intellect, and power if not to generate at least one catastrophic love triangle? The question alone kept entire generations of lyricists employed, despite producing exactly 0 romantic tragedies to set to verse. One must remember that on Olympus, abstaining from romance was itself a kind of rebellion. Aphrodite turned heads merely by existing. Zeus's conquests numbered higher than the stars he flung across the sky, and even Hera, despite decades of wedded irritation, was not above inspiring the occasional illicit crush. By contrast, Athena's private life was as empty as a freshly swept temple floor, which paradoxically made it a topic of endless speculation. It wasn't for lack of opportunity, at least if we trust the half-baked tales whispered in Olympus's marbled halls. The occasional mortal hero, flush with improbable courage and equally improbable muscles, might fancy himself capable of thawing the goddess's famous reserve. These hopeful souls inevitably discovered 2 things. First, that Athena's gaze could reduce even the most lion-hearted to apologetic silence. And second, that divine disinterest is far more absolute than mortal rejection. One can only imagine their embarrassment afterward, composing sombre hymns to the unconquerable heart, and quietly omitting the part where the heart in question had never shown the slightest flicker of interest to begin with. Yet rumours persisted, as rumours always do. Some suggested she merely waited for an intellect equal to her own, a hero of such wit and wisdom that even she might be intrigued. Others muttered about secret affections cleverly disguised as patronage. A few, braver in stupidity than sense, proposed that perhaps the goddess had already fallen in love but refused to admit it. These theories enjoyed a brief vogue among poets before collapsing under the crushing weight of Athena's consistent, decades-long indifference. Even among the gods, her romantic silence became an enduring puzzle. Aphrodite, who took the divine equivalent of professional pride in her matchmaking, is said to have treated Athena as Olympus's great unfinished project. Attempts, subtle, unsubtle, and occasionally humiliating, were made to nudge the goddess toward a passing fancy, always to no avail. Athena's response, though never recorded in words, was implied in every dismissive tilt of her helmet, an unspoken reminder that wisdom, unlike wine or bronze, is not forged in passion's fire. To be fair, her refusal had less to do with disdain for romance than with a practical awareness of its cost. Even a cursory glance at Olympus's love stories read like cautionary tales. The jealousies, the cursed offspring, the multi-generational blood feuds. If mortals saw love as divine blessing, Athena saw it as a logistical disaster waiting to happen. The first domino in a chain that ended with burning cities and awkward family gatherings. Her eternal maidenhood, then, was less a rejection of feeling and more a form of strategic abstinence. A refusal to introduce yet another source of chaos into a universe already brimming with it. And still, the mortal world couldn't help but take it personally. Statues dedicated to her typically depicted a serene, armoured figure with an expression just short of a sigh, as if the sculptor hoped to coax some softer emotion from marble. Poets lamented the cold heart of stone, ignoring that the same stone had built their walls, taught their laws, and occasionally saved them from total ruin. They spoke as if romance were the only measure of worth, failing to recognise the quiet devotion embedded in every temple column and city street bearing her name. Naturally, this frustration spilled over into myth-making of the clumsiest sort. Some claimed Athena's disinterest proved she simply hadn't met the right hero yet, as though a divine strategy goddess required rescue by the next strong-jawed demigod with a spear. Others suggested secret heartbreak, a doomed love buried so deep no oracle could uncover it, a hypothesis more revealing of mortal projection than divine reality. Worst of all were those who assumed her chastity must mask some hidden scandal, as if a woman refusing romance had to be running from something. Among the more infamous rumours stood the tale of Medusa, a story retold so often and so creatively misremembered that its original meaning was buried under layers of gossip. The brief, bureaucratic truth is this: Medusa, once a priestess sworn to serve Athena, broke her vow in Athena's own temple. Whether seduced, coerced, or simply reckless, the result was the same: a sacred oath violated. Athena's response, turning Medusa into a creature whose gaze turned men to stone, has been debated ever since. Critics, with hindsight conveniently sharper than divine judgment, called it cruel. Admirers pointed to the monstrous transformation as an act of grim empowerment. Medusa, no longer vulnerable, became untouchable. The goddess herself offered no clarifications, leaving mortals to squabble endlessly over her motives. What is clear is that Athena's approach to romance, even other people's, tended toward the defensive rather than forgiving, a strategy shaped by the recognition that desire, left unchecked, often ends in ruin, If there was tragedy in Athena's solitude, it was of the quietest kind. The tragedy of watching mortals destroy themselves over passions she found so easily avoidable. Time and again, heroes sought her counsel, swore to heed her wisdom, then dashed headlong into ruin, chasing a lover's glance or a promise of eternal fame. Each time she might intervene, shielding them, advising them, sometimes even rescuing them, but never stepping closer herself. It wasn't that Athena felt nothing, rather she understood too well the cost of feeling too much. Olympus's informal rumour mill, run largely by minor nymphs and bored lesser gods, documented every flicker of speculation. Was that a wistful sigh they overheard, or merely the wind in her helmet plume? Did the goddess's gaze linger too long on a mortal hero's statue? These debates produced enough scrolls to fill an entire wing of the library of Alexandria, all of them signifying nothing but mortal impatience, with an answer they refused to accept, that some hearts, even divine ones, simply prefer solitude. And yet, even Athena couldn't fully escape the poetic impulse to frame her chastity as sacrifice. Statues depicted her as serene yet solemn, eyes fixed beyond the mortal realm, as if mourning a love she never allowed herself. It made for compelling imagery, even if the goddess herself might have dismissed it with a dry remark about marble's inability to capture reality. Mortals need their deities to reflect human longings, and Athena's stubborn refusal forced them to project those longings onto her anyway. The irony, of course, is that Athena's truest love story was with the very concept of civilization, the walls she helped design, the laws she whispered into the ears of lawmakers, the shipwrights she inspired to carve prows worthy of the seas. Her affection lay in craft and counsel, in every carefully weighed decision that spared mortals from ruin. Yet to most, these quiet devotions seemed insufficiently dramatic. Romance, they argued, should be passionate, reckless, and occasionally catastrophic. Athena's steady, unsentimental dedication felt cold by comparison. Perhaps the greatest testament to Athena's singular nature was that even after centuries of speculation, scandal never stuck. Temples remained busy, sacrifices burned, and her statues stood unblemished by rumour. In the end, mortals grudgingly accepted what Olympus had long known. Athena simply wasn't interested. Not in lovers, not in entanglements, not even in the poetry her refusal inspired. And so, the goddess of wisdom remained eternally apart, serenely untroubled by what others deemed essential. Love to her was a battlefield best avoided entirely, a choice that bewildered, disappointed, and quietly fascinated mortals for generations. In the next part, we shall see how even Athena's disciplined reserve had its limits, as she confronted the messy consequences of divine punishment, monstrous transformations, and the eternal question of what to do when your temple becomes the site of scandal. For even the goddess of wisdom occasionally found herself forced to make decisions that no strategy could fully sanitize. And nowhere was this clearer than in her dealings with Medusa. If Olympus ever bothered to keep formal minutes, the Medusa affair would appear under a heading like Unplanned Brand Crisis and Subsequent Monster Creation Initiative. Unfortunately, divine record keeping remained stubbornly oral and heavily biased. So what survives is an uneven patchwork of rumour, regret, and marble statues of heroes looking politely horrified. It began, as these things often do, in a temple, a sacred space meant to inspire devotion, filled with the faint aroma of burning offerings and the ever-present risk that some mortal would do something spectacularly inappropriate. Enter Medusa, once a priestess of notable beauty and rather less notable judgment, who found herself at the centre of a scandal involving Poseidon, god of the sea, earthquakes, and questionable romantic choices. Details remain contested, largely because Olympus prefers a tidy narrative over an accurate one. Some claim Medusa was seduced, others say she was unwilling, and a few argue it doesn't matter because either way, it happened inside Athena's temple. That was, from the divine perspective, the real catastrophe. An oath broken in the one place meant to remain untouched by mortal passion. The gods, like bureaucracies everywhere, could forgive many things: failure, arrogance, hubris on Tuesdays. But they drew the line at tarnishing the brand. Athena's reaction has been endlessly debated by mortals, most of whom assume goddesses must experience human dilemmas in exactly the same way. Did she feel pity, fury, indignation? Or was it, as seems most likely, the divine equivalent of discovering someone spray-painted obscenities on the walls of your brand new headquarters? A cold, appalled recognition that action must be taken to protect the enterprise. The chosen response was, in hindsight, dramatic. Medusa was transformed from a priestess admired for her beauty into a creature whose gaze turned living things into stone. Mortals, quick to spot an allegory, read it as punishment for vanity or as cosmic victim-blaming. Others saw it as an act of protection, rendering Medusa untouchable, quite literally, to any further violation. Athena herself offered no clarification, leaving the world to spin theories while she got back to drafting municipal codes and designing new spearheads. From a purely functional standpoint, the decision made a twisted sort of sense. Monsters, after all, were part of the Olympian toolkit, living cautionary tales that reinforced divine authority. Why pen 1,000 moral scrolls warning mortals against sacrilege when you could create a single, unforgettable example? The stone-carving gaze proved efficient, a permanent deterrent, instantly recognisable, and cost-effective in the long run. No mortal ever again considered misusing Athena's temple space, once word spread that doing so might result in permanent statuary. Of course, managing the aftermath required its own delicate strategy. Medusa was, after all, once under Athena's patronage. Her transformation risked looking vindictive, inconsistent with the goddess's carefully curated brand as the patroness of justice and reason. The solution lay, as always, in narrative control, emphasizing the sanctity of vows, the gravity of sacred spaces, and, crucially, keeping the conversation away from the details that raised uncomfortable questions. Mortals, being mortals, preferred mythic drama over nuance. Medusa quickly became a monster in popular imagination, terrifying, exotic, and conveniently feminine in her fatal power. Sculptors and poets revelled in the horror, producing countless images of coiling serpents and staring eyes, each new piece cementing, sometimes literally, Medusa's role in the cultural canon. Athena's own statues, by contrast, remained serene, armoured and unyielding, as though politely declining to engage with the controversy.